I am going to teach you today how to make a tenoned mitre, and I love this joint. It's a very strong joint. It's very different than just mitring a joint and driving a nail through a little bit of glue. This is a joint that's designed to last for 100 years, 150 years. This is an example of one here where the tenon part of it passes into a mortised part like this. Put it together. When you glue this and you've got it clamped and everything, it should last for a very long time. So let's set that aside. To do this joint, we're relying on accuracy, and one of the things that I'm going to show you is how to use a router as a gauge, how to use the router to guarantee certain surfaces and to make sure everything is as exact as you want it to be. So we've got good mitres, good shoulder lines. Here's one that's been glued up. So we've got a square shoulder on the back face, and we've got a mitre on the front face. Nice joint lines inside here, but it relies on one small thing, and it's called a jig. So this is the jig that I used to make that mitre. I'm going to make another one just to show you how it's made. It's very quick and very simple. Use a pencil, just come down from the end here about 1.5 inches, and then go from this line another 1.5 inches. That's going to be the overall length of this jig. I've gone onto the two edges just to show me where to start and stop. Now, these are my pieces that I'm actually going to use for the frame. So what I did is I set the two pins on a mortise gauge like this. So the pins are just, the cones of the pins, the very points, are just either side of the chisel that I'm going to use to do some of the chopping work, some of the parting work that I need. So it's just on either side. Then I loosen this and I center this on this workpiece. So I go from one side and then I go to the other side. And when those pins correspond with one another, I know it's dead center. That's going to give me the position of the tenon and the position of the mortise aspect of the joint. So now that I've got that, what I've got to do is, where those pins came into the surface of the wood, I'm going to make them a bit more pronounced so you can see them like that. So, oops, sorry. So that's the position right there and there. I'm going to set my router right on the center of that pin, just like that. So that is going to now be the position that I want. In between these two lines here, I'm going to run this gauge, I'll use this router as a gauge. I'm going to run that in between there, flip over and do just the same on the other side. And we're going to then cut this recess out. This one doesn't have to be very accurate. What does have to be accurate is the depth of the recess. When we're cross-cutting here, like this, we can just go across on those two lines, down to or into the line. You don't have to stop above the line. You can go past slightly. I'm going to take a 1-inch chisel, put it about halfway down, about 1/8 from the surface, and just pop it with the heel of my hand. Now I've gone right into the gauge line, the router line that I marked it with, and I'm reaching for the sky, so the chisel is pointing upwards. Go a little bit lower with each cut, but not below that gauge line, like this. And I'm going to work from both sides. So this is just to make the gauge. It doesn't take very much to make it. So I'm in the gauge line now, and I just pop it with the heel of my hand. If your hands are not toughened up, just use a chisel hammer. Now I'm lowering the point of my chisel with each pass here, but I'm going to leave this crowning in the middle, like this. And then I go for the router, make sure the surface is nice and clear, and I just use the router just as I would a paring chisel, And I come in and work that grain. So I've gone a little past halfway. Now I work from this edge here, like this. And I've got a perfectly plain surface in the bottom of that recess. Simply cut this off now, like this. There it is, and that's my gauge, my guide, whatever we call it, already made. So this is going to guide a lot of the things that I'm going to lay out for you. So I'm going to show you how to lay out the joint next. And I'm going to use this, a couple of chisels, a saw, and we're going to have this joint together very quickly. I'm ready to lay out my joint, and we're going to use the jig, we're going to use the router. We're no longer going to use the gauge because we don't need it. We're replacing the gauge with the template, the guide, and the router. So to get to this stage, I'm going to break this apart. You may want to make one of these joints as a practice piece, because even when you're used to doing them, as I am fairly used to it, I don't use this joint a whole lot, but it's very easy to make a mistake, put lines in the wrong places. So it's a good idea to have one. So I've got a mitre here. This is actually one I'm going to be using on the frame that I'm making. But I'm going to make an exact replica of the one I've already got there. So what I'm first of all going to do is I'm going to make a line for my mitre across here. And I'm going to use pencil temporarily because it gives me the points for the start and stop of the lines. But ultimately I'm going to be relying on a knife to give me the exact knife lines that I want to cut to. So I've got my shoulder line here. This is going to be removed here, and it's going to be removed to a depth here and here. This is where we start to see how the router becomes the gauge. So we're going to run this along here. So now I've run the gauge line on here. I can run the gauge line onto the end grain too. Put it in the vise if you're uncertain about holding these objects. It might be safer. So we're going to be cutting this cheek off completely in the same way this one has been removed too. So I'm going to bring my pencil line onto this back face here, and I'm going to bring it onto this edge a little bit, because part of this, where I started this gauge line, came off the end grain here. Now I'm going to run it onto this back edge here, like this, stopping at that pencil line. So let me put some pencil lines inside the gauge lines here so you can see where we're going with this, here and here. So this is going to be removed just like this one was. And this is also going to be removed here. So we're going to run the gauge line onto the end of here, like this, and also onto this edge here, like this. So this is the first half. This is not running, there we go. This is the first half of the joint laid out. Pencil line just to show us where we're going. So this is coming out, this is coming out. This goes here. Now we're going to create this one. This one is just as simple. We take the distance from the thickness of our piece of wood here. Now I've milled my wood superbly accurately, because so it's exactly the same width, thickness all the way around. I spent much time making sure, because I knew that I had to run the router as my gauge against either of these two faces. So now this is going to go here like this one. So now I know this is a mitre on here. So right on that point there where it intersects, there's my mitre. This part is staying on the back. So now I'm going to use my router here. Up onto this end. And also right along the back too, here. Then I'm going to turn it end for end, and I'm going to run the gauge line on this side as well, just like that. Onto the end. And down onto this, what I think will be the inside face. So make sure that, can you see how my sole of the plane is registered flat against this surface? And I make sure it stays flat as I run that gauge line there. Okay, well I've got it here, pencil in the gauge lines so you can see and I can see where we're going. There and there. This time it's this whole midsection that's going to be removed. Just like a mortise, except we're going to do it with a saw. So this gets cut out. And then afterwards, we look at this the same as this one. So this part is going to be removed up to that mitre. So let me go ahead and sharpen up my chisels, get everything ready. You want a good sharp knife for this. Make sure you're ready for it, and I'll show you then how we cut this joint. We're ready to start cutting the joint. I'm going to cut the mortise part first because I think it's probably the trickier of the two, maybe. So right on that penciled mitre, I've got everything locked off. This finger's opposing my thumb, so it's nice and tight in here. I've just sharpened my knife up. So first pass is very light, the second pass is quite heavy. This is only to give me the position for the mortise. So where the knife intersected this corner here, I put my knife right into that and I go across this shoulder line here. Using that same reference, this one here where it intersected here, I drop my knife in there and make a small nick on this opposite side, like that. Stand it up, slide my square up to the knife, and right between those gauge lines, I'm cutting the fibres, severing those fibres. Now I'm going to suggest you leave plenty of wood on. You could leave, say, 0.5 millimetre or even up to 1 millimetre in the waste wood. So the waste wood is the bit in the middle that we're going to be removing. So come on this side of the line for one cheek. Just like that. Once you've got that clear cut across the top, you can start lowering your arm, working down the line to the bottom corner. So I've gone corner to corner pretty much. If I show you this, I've left about 1 millimetre on here. So I've left that on. I left it on purpose. It wasn't really inaccurate cutting. It was because I want the wood retaining there so that I can pare down it afterwards with my chisel using a guide, the guide that we made to guide the chisel. So now I'm going down this side. And across from side to side. I'm just staying away from my line by 1 mil or so. I'm going on the opposite side. Stop above your line. And now I want to remove this midsection. So what I suggest, I've got the exact size chisel that I'm actually going to use here. So I've already got my knife wall in there. Just chisel into that knife wall like this. That gave me the little step down, and then go with your chisel, but go very, very gently, because otherwise you'll move that knife wall like that, away from that knife wall with this. And as you go deeper, you can go with slightly stronger cuts. You can work from the end now, actually. You can probably just chisel that out, work down, keep your chisel perpendicular. I'm just going to pare down here. And I am about halfway, I think. Flip over and do the same from this side. Work down here. And I'm almost there. And I think that's it. Watch what happens now. This is probably the trickiest part of this. What we've got to do is use the guide in here and clamp this in the vise. But if we apply pressure, then this part of it is going to compress under the vise pressure. So what I did is I just cut a wedge here, 1/8 of an inch to about 3/8 of an inch, that I can slide down and put into the open joint there, and then squeeze it tight here. That gives me enough surface there that's held firmly to pare down here. So I'm paring down here. Now I'm going to use a narrower chisel, 3/4 inch, to go down inside here a little bit further. Then you can just move this wedge around a little bit just to open up enough to get the chisel further down into the cut. Just feel for that edge, just feel for the grain, because the outside edge of this, that top end grain here, is actually going to be seen. So I'm working from one side. I'm going to put the wedge back in lower down in the cut, and what I'm looking for is I'm making sure there is no gap right along this edge here. If there's a gap, then I've clamped it too much. No, there is no gap, so now I can use this reference face to pare all the way down till I've gone about halfway inside this mortise. I'm going to flip over and work from this opposite face here now. So pare down here. This is what's guaranteeing the exact size of this opening. Constantly working. So I'm pressing hard. You can see my knuckles are white with pressure here to keep this chisel flat against this face. And I'm using the very corner to pare down into the fibers like this. Now this last little bit I'm going to get without the gauge on the face, but I can push this against here now, take the chisel right on this end grain, and just pare down the end grain, using my thumb against the back edge of here, taking care because these chisels are sharp, and then right inside I'm just pear cutting. Again, I can use the guide on the outside here to register my chisel against. It gives me that extension, and that's one side done. Now I do exactly the same on this on the opposite side. In the vise, wedge in place, nice and firm. So I can see the chisel is going right into my groove. I'm going to go with this narrower chisel. Going down with my wedge a little bit further. Anything that I can gain, and this is what guarantees, all being well, this joint coming together with a perfect meeting surface here. It seems a little tedious, but it's really not. And I know that you're going to enjoy this. So just feel for the grain. Rock that chisel like I'm doing. See, I go in here and I rock it using the corners, using the edge, and I can see the surface does look as though it's being planed inside. Get my wedge out. I'm going to put this on the top just to pare down from the end here. So I've got my thumb pressing it against here, and I can just feel a few fibers there. In this face, the same. And that's basically that part of the first joint done. I'm using the chisel now to pare down the inside corners, paring that end grain. In there. And that's basically it. Okay. I feel happy with that. It feels good, it looks good. And I'll put this so you can see it. So the only remaining part of this now is to cut the mitre on here into the vise. Wide chisel. We've got the knife wall already there. Just pop that with the heel of your hand. Give you that nice step down. Drop your tenon saw right into the recess. There it is. The very last remaining bit is to take a very, very sharp chisel. You've got your knife wall on the outside face to guide you, and you just take your chisel along here just to pare down those end grain fibers and get rid of the fuzzy bits. That's the first half done. Now I'm going to cut the second half. This one is so fast. This one is so nice. Remember to cut on the right side of the line. If you cut on the wrong side, your tenon will be too small. We're going to cut the waste wood. So this is the waste wood. This is the waste wood. Take your chisel again. Remember, you don't have to cut to your lines with this. It's very unusual with tenon cutting. I'm cutting on the waist side by about 1 millimetre, dropping my hand like that, flip it around, cut from this side, down that wall, now I probably should have cut my shoulder line first, which I'm going to do now. I should have probably cross cut. I usually do it that way. There is no rule for it, but so you can do it either way, but I usually cut this first, not second. All right. This only goes on that first cheek. It doesn't go all the way across to the opposite side. Chisel in. I love this. This is you doing this. This is you. You're going to be making one of these, I know. A little bit higher. See, I didn't quite go deep enough there. Okay, flip over. What we're doing here, we're going to come down this. So I don't want to go into this face at all because it will show when it's done. So this one, away from your line, because these ends will show. All right. Now remember, this mitre is contingent on this shoulder line here. So drop your knife onto that edge and make a mark on this corner. Just something you can drop your knife into. And we're coming across here. Once you get this locked in place, pull that knife wall. Like that. And then your shoulder cut. And then back to your router again. Register on that face. And just use your chisel, just like a chisel. Just pair, cut this surface face a little bit at a time. Remember, this end grain is going to show, so you want it as smooth as possible. Sometimes, especially with woods like pine, there is no guarantee. Cherry, walnut, you can pretty much guarantee it, but with pine, oak, you have no guarantees really. You just be as careful as you can. And there it is. And I think you'll see what I mean if I show you this. Right in here, the grain here undulated, so I've got these growth rings. When I was routing it, it looks like it's fairly level on the end, so I feel like it's going to work. But it did leave a couple of slight undulations there that can affect how my joint goes together. I'm going to look at my shoulder lines, like on this one. I'm going to do this on the bench top to show you, but usually I would do this in the vise. I'm going to come on this up inside of that top edge and just pare down here. Okay. And the same on this one here, like this. Just pare down those engrained fibres. I've got one more routed surface to do. I'm being a little bit more careful here. That feels like a lot of wood to take off there, so I probably should have cut a little bit closer to my line. It looks like it's coming out nicely for me. I don't know. We'll see. There it is. Let's see what we got. This goes on here. And this looks pretty good. I'm listening for popping sounds here. I don't want to force this. Hit a little pop then. But I feel pretty good that this joint is going to go together. Let's give it a whirl. And it did go together, I think, with a little bit of adjustment here. Which way? You have to kind of, you have this push me pull you thing with this kind of joint. To get it right. But all I have to do is a little bit of finagling there. And I know this joint will come good with a little bit of extra pressure from here and there. I feel good. I'm just going to finesse this one joint because sometimes it looks worse than it is. If you looked at this and you saw that, you'd think this was a terrible joint. You look at the opposite side, the shoulder is off. But there's something just snagging this, and I don't really know what it is. So what I'm going to do is break this apart, and I'm going to offer this nice straight edge against this mitre here. When I put that against the mitre and it's pressed down, I have no gap at all. So what I'm going to do is check the other one with another straight edge right on here, press it down firm onto the surface, and I've got gaps all the way along, which means that down in the bottom of this is not pared back enough. So I'm going to have to put this in the vise here and take my chisel, offer it right on the edge of the knife wall and pare into the surface fibres. And I work along the cut that way because I think this is what's holding the bulk of this mitre away from its partner. So I work along this cut just like this. Now I'm going to check on the opposite side here with this square edge, offer this up to it, and I can see a slight gap on this side here, which means there are some surface fibres on there, right on this end here. So I'm on the inside of my knife wall, right down here, and I just pare down here, like this. These are the little things we do, drop this on here, and that gap's still there. I feel like I may have a slightly rounded edge here. I think I do. There, I can see the... So I'm going to go back on to the low point here, slide up. So this shoulder point here is right on the edge of my square. And I'm pulling and flexing my knife into that edge, and I can see it's got a slight crown on there. I don't know how I did it. Seems like it would be impossible, but I did it. Oops, drop right off. So now I'm going to go right onto the knife wall, just to get down. It's not going to work that way, so I'm going to go in the vise. I have no choice. Work on the chisel edge. Aha, that's better. So I've taken off that rise, off of this back, and I've got the crisp, clean line that I wanted. It's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. So this goes here, and I'm going to try this now and see where we end up. You've got to get this just right, because you've got these two seating shoulders. You've got the mitre, and then you've got the other. There it is. It's not hitting there, which means it can't be hitting all the way across here. So I pull this around. I've got a perfect shoulder line there, but my mitre is off on this side, and I know I have to do something with this to make it fit. So I'm looking inside and out. I can see, I think, what it is. Can you see there's a discrepancy? I can see there's about 1.5 millimeters difference between the shoulder there and the original pencil line. And right on the inside corner here, I've got 1 millimeter inside here. I may not have quite got this perfect. Break it apart again. Slide the square inside like this, and look on the inside. And there, right in there, I've got a good millimeter between that line. How I did it, I don't know. But I did, so I'm going to bring a knife mark here, a knife mark over here, and let's see whether I was accurate or not. There, that's what's holding me off. That's about the distance on my mitre as well. So I mispositioned my knife or something. Back in with the chisel, and actually I can see a step inside there as well, so that's not helping me. Hit the step there, so again, off of the square inside the mortise, and now it's closed up inside there, so I don't have the gap. Either way, I don't have the gap. Let's try again. And there it is. So now I'm happy that my mitre is going to come together perfectly. So I've got the mitre exactly where I want. You may have to do this on yours. Not complicated, just a little bit of patience, and you'll have that perfect joint.